Chapter 3. "Well, that didn't go very well," said Vega, as the two girls, looking dejected, stood on the cosmic transporter on the way back to their dormitory. After Leona kicked them out, they had stood there for a moment, wondering if they should knock and try to explain themselves. The door had slid open, and they had smiled, eager to make amends. But Leona stuck her head out and said, "This isn't for you. Our scanner isn't working right, and I have to leave it open for Ophelia, in case I fall asleep before she gets back." She withdrew her head, then stuck it out again. "It's time for you to go." Cassie had opened her mouth to reply, but Vega had stepped onto the cosmic transporter, pulling Cassie along with her. Enough was enough. Now Vega looked down at the smaller girl, who was frowning. "That must have been really hard for you," she told Cassie sympathetically. "You two were starting to become such good friends." Cassie shrugged as if it didn't matter, but Vega was pretty sure she was still smarting. The girl's soft burgundy eyes flashed behind her large star-shaped glasses. "Well, at least now we know that Scarlet is still on campus," she said. "I was afraid that she left the school." Vega nodded. "We need to find her and see how she's doing. And," she added to herself, "convince her to rejoin the band." "Exactly," said Cassie. "She needs to know that we're still her friends, even if she isn't," she lowered her voice, "officially one of us." "I'll tell you one thing, though," Vega said thoughtfully, leaning on the railing. "Leona gets along really well with Ophelia, which is more than I can say for Piper and me these days, that's for sure." She turned to Cassie. "Hey, are you and Sage still bickering?" Cassie opened her mouth to speak, then shut it. "I said, are you and Sage still bickering?" Vega repeated. Cassie's brow was furrowed. "I heard you the first time," she said, "and it just started me thinking." She looked down at her silver slippers deep in thought, then lifted her head. "No," she said. "We've actually been getting along great. Ever since..." "Ever since what?" Vega asked. Cassie was nodding to herself. "That's so weird. I just realized the oddest thing. Sage and I have been getting along great ever since I got rid of that vase of flowers." Vega made a face. "You mean those gorgeous coral flowers we all got? You got rid of them? Why would you do that? They're so pretty and they smell so good." Cassie tilted her head to the side. "They were pretty," she said, "and they did smell great." She paused for a moment to collect her thoughts. "And I can't really explain it, but I had this weird feeling about them. So one day, I just threw them away. Sage was really mad at me at first and tried to get them back, but they had already vanished." Vega nodded. "Once you put your refuse into a garbage can on Starland, it disappeared. Forever." "But she got over it amazingly quickly, and we had a good laugh about it. And we've gotten along ever since. How funny that I just put that together." Vega barked out a laugh. "Oh, Cassie," she said. "Not to be rude or anything, but you have to admit that sometimes your hunches are totally wrong." Cassie looked like she was about to argue, so Vega began to list examples. "Remember when you were convinced that the bot waiter served you breakfast for dinner one night because it was mad at you, but it really just needed to be retuned?" Cassie bit her lip. "Yeah," she said. "Or when you thought that Lady Rancora stole your Stars app when it was obvious that she picked up the wrong one by accident?" Cassie blushed. "Oh, You're right. I did act a little crazy then. Her determination returned. But this time, I'm pretty sure I'm onto something. I'm just saying that sometimes what seems like a hunch is just you being overly sensitive about things, Vega concluded. And I just find it hard to believe that those gorgeous flowers we all got have some sort of power to make roommates argue with each other. Think about it. What would be the point? It's ridiculous. Cassie frowned. I know it sounds strange, she said, but I can't dismiss the fact that everything between us was better afterwards. She frowned. But Leona and Ophelia are getting along great, right? I mean, she couldn't have stuck up for her any more than she did. And I know Leona had those flowers in her room. I saw them when they first got them. Her voice trailed off. That's true, said Vega. So we're forgetting about that crazy idea? Actually, Cassie said with a frown, I don't remember seeing any flowers in their room just now. Do you? Vega laughed. I'm sure they had flowers, just like all of us. She thought for a moment. In fact, I remember Scarlet complaining that they weren't black. Here, I'll prove it. She whipped out her Stars app and accessed the video album. Cassie gave a low whistle. Really, Vega? You holo-videoed the room? That's just weird. Vega shrugged. I holo-vid lots of things. She turned it on, and Cassie leaned over her shoulder to watch. She saw the strange room, half messy, half empty, come into view, as the holo camera scanned it and its contents, or lack thereof. Sure enough, the flowers were nowhere to be seen. See? No flowers, Cassie said triumphantly. I just can't believe that you think a vase of flowers could possibly make people not get along. It seems like a really big leap to take, said Vega. Cassie stamped her foot. I don't know why you can't see it. Sage and I, and Leona and Ophelia are all getting along, and no one else is. It's so clear. Cassie certainly has a temper, thought Vega, as they stepped off the cosmic transporter, pushed open the door to the dorm, and stepped outside. It was funny. The girl had been super shy at first, but when Cassie got to know someone, her true self certainly started to come out. They were greeted by the always soothing sound of the Bloombugs' evening chorus. Cassie seemed to relax, for which Vega was grateful. Then came the sounds of students returning home for the evening. They chatted and laughed, their voices low, and their bellies no doubt pleasantly full. The two girls paused for a moment between the dorm buildings, not quite ready to go inside the Little Dipper dormitory. Vega squinted. I think I see your roommate, she said. Hey, what's that in the air following her? Cassie looked into the distance and grinned. That's a BotBot guide, she said. Moj4 to be precise. He has been following Sage everywhere, ever since she got back from her mission. Vega guffawed. I thought we weren't allowed to have pets on campus. That's grounds for automatic dismissal. Cassie's alabaster face grew even more pale, which seemed impossible to Vega. It is? She said worriedly. I was just joking, said Vega. It is forbidden, of course, but the student handbook does not specifically mention automatic dismissal. Cassie looked relieved. Vega shook her head. But BotBots are like neutral. No emotions, you know? They certainly don't play favorites. They're supposed to help us all equally. Cassie shrugged. Well, nobody told that to Mojo. Mojo? Said Vega. She gave Cassie a puzzled look. That's what he likes to be called, Cassie explained. Likes to be called? Vega shook her head. This was highly irregular. I don't get it, she said. Well, maybe it's because we're the Star Darlings, Cassie said with a shrug. We're special. But that didn't make sense to Vega. If Moj4 was a special Star Darlings bot, wouldn't he be following them all around? This was highly irregular, and Vega didn't like it one bit. She shook her head as if to clear it, and tipped it back to look at the stars which had just started to stud the darkening sky. Staring into the heavens always calmed her, and she brightened with an idea. Let's make a bet, she said to Cassie. Cassie chuckled. You and your games, she said, but her voice was kind. Perhaps the stars had settled her as well. I just remembered that we have a botany lab on campus, said Vega. We do, agreed Cassie. So, who better to tell us if there really is something odd about the flowers? Vega asked. Cassie nodded. That's a great idea. Vega had a plan. We can bring them in and leave them for observation, she suggested. We won't say a word about them. Just see what they can tell us. But here's the bet. If I'm right, and they are simply ordinary flowers, you have to do a puzzle with me every star day for a double star week. Cassie sighed, but she was smiling. Fine, she said. But if I'm right, and there's something wrong with the flowers, you have to help me with my astral accounting test. I'm just not absorbing the lessons the way I want to. Vega would have helped Cassie with her astral accounting anyway. She adored numbers. But she simply said, It's a deal. The two girls pressed their foreheads together. The traditional starling way of sealing a deal. Vega smiled. She knew that Cassie's imagination was getting away with her. The flowers would turn out to be normal, just as she thought, and she'd be able to share her rebuses and crossword puzzles with a friend for 16 whole star days. It was a win-win situation. They'd find Scarlet, and Leona would eventually return to her usual jovial self. Everything was going to be okay. The two tore themselves away from the brilliant night sky and headed inside to the cosmic transporter, which would take them to their respective rooms. Good night, said Vega, who was dropped off first. Good night, said Cassie with a yawn. I'll pick you and the flowers up in the morning, before breakfast. See you tomorrow, said Vega. She placed her hand on the scanner and stepped inside. She checked the time on her Stars app. She'd be able to replay the day's lessons and listen to them twice before bed. Most students just listened to theirs at night as they slept. But Vega didn't like to take any chances. She wanted to graduate with top honors, and she'd do anything to make it happen. She put on her pajamas, sparkled her face, and brushed her teeth with her toothlight, then settled into bed with her earphones on. Piper, as usual, was already asleep. Ding, 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 ding. Cassie put her hand over the small bell that sat on the botany lab's front desk to put an end to Vega's incessant ringing. The laboratory was located on the top floor of Halo Hall's science installation, where the scientific departments and classrooms were located, and sunlight streamed through the glass roof, causing the two girls to squint at each other. That's enough, Vega, Cassie said. Well, where are they? Vega asked. She placed the flowers on the desk. We're going to miss breakfast. It's the most important meal of the day, you know. Although she was feeling quite impatient, she glanced around at the hydrangeas of varieties of plants that filled the room. The botany lab boasted that it had a sample of every plant that grew on Starland, as well as several varieties that starlings had brought back from trips to Wishworld. And it certainly appeared to be true. The air in the laboratory was moist and warm. Pleasantly so, Vega thought. And the many blossoms perfumed the air with an intoxicating scent. Vega spotted an interesting-looking specimen sitting on a shelf nearby. It was a short, squat, chubby plant, and it looked tantalizingly fuzzy. "Go ahead. Touch me," it seemed to be saying. She reached out a finger toward the plant. "Careful!" someone said. Vega jumped back and turned around. A woman in a white lab coat stood behind her, a blue hollow name tag pinned to her chest. Vega leaned forward and read it. Gladiolus Rose, Botany Lab Assistant. "I'm Gladiolus Rose, Botany Lab Assistant," she said, unnecessarily. "Didn't mean to startle you," she added in an apologetic tone. "But I'd be careful if I were you. That's a cactus from Wish World." "What's a cactus?" asked Vega. "Cactus plants are quite interesting because they don't need much water, and they're very protective of themselves." She laughed, waggling her bandaged fingers at Vega. "I learned the hard way. Those soft-looking hairs are really pointy little spikes that can get stuck in your skin." Vega backed away. "Thanks for the warning," she said. "Sorry for keeping you waiting," Gladiolus said. "I'm the only one on duty right now. Everyone else is attending a morning meeting, so I'm in charge of the lab at the moment. How can I help you?" Vega lifted the vase of flowers off the desk. "We received these flowers as a gift. We don't recognize them, and we were wondering if you could help us identify them," she said. Gladiolus immediately looked intrigued. She reached for the vase and lifted it from Vega's hands. She studied the coral blossoms closely. "So interesting. They have the coloring of a Roxylinda, but the flower is similar to a calliope," she said. She held up a single bloom. "But the leaves are more like those found on a violina. It's very intriguing. I don't think I've seen anything like this before. Perhaps it's some kind of new hybrid." She shook her head. "Of course," she added, "I'm still an assistant, so maybe one of the botanists will have a better idea of what these are. Can you leave them with us?" "Yes," Vega and Cassie answered in unison. Gladiolus leaned over and took a deep sniff. "I just can't stop smelling them. The scent is so similar to my favorite flower, the calistola. But they look nothing like them." "Really?" said Cassie in disbelief. "I think they smell just like—" Vega gave Cassie a gentle kick to stop her from talking. "I guess we'll be going now," she said. "We'll be in touch." She didn't want Cassie to give the assistant botanist any clues about the flowers. Gladiolus smiled. "Startastic. This will be a fun challenge." She nodded, still staring at the flowers. I'm almost compelled to keep sniffing them. It must be part of their makeup to attract insects to pollinate them. But how strange that it affects starlings so strongly as well. So interesting. Star salutations for bringing these in." The two girls said goodbye and left the lab. They broke into a jog when they realized how late it was, and raced each other to the Celestial Cafe. Most of their fellow star darlings had already finished their breakfast and set off for class. Only Clover remained, finishing a bowl of Sparkleos. The two girls placed a quick order with their hovering bot-bot waiter, and soon received their Astro Muffins and Glorange juice in to-go cups. They thanked the waiter. "I wish you girls had time for a real meal," the bot-bot waiter said sadly, and they assured him they would make time for a proper breakfast the following morning. They munched their muffins on the way to class. "So what class do you have now?" Vega asked, before taking a long swig of juice. "Wish fulfillment," said Cassie with a smile. Professor Eugenia Bright was a captivating teacher and routinely won top honors as Starling Academy's favorite professor. "Lucky," said Vega. "I have wish identification." With Professor Lucretia Delphinus? Asked Cassie. Then you have my sympathies. Tiny and tough, Professor Lucretia Delphinus was an inspiring teacher, but her temper could be mercurial. When she was in a happy mood, her class was a dream, and Vega didn't want it to end. But if she was feeling cranky, everyone needed to watch out. On those days, Vega would sit through the whole class willing time to fly, and trying hard not to steal glances at her stars app to check on its progress. Once, Professor Lucretia Delphinus caught a student surreptitiously checking her stars app, and she grabbed it from the girl and read the offending holotext out loud. Most unfortunately, it had said, "Do you have good PLD or bad PLD for class today?" The girl had tried to explain that PLD stood for positive light definition, but PLD herself would have none of it. There had been detention as a result. For everyone. "I can't wait to find out what's going on with the flowers," said Cassie excitedly, changing the subject. "The wait is going to kill me." "Me too," said Vega teasingly. "I can't wait to discover that they're just ordinary flowers, and that you'll be playing games with me all double Star Week." Cassie shook her head. "Didn't you hear what she said? She'd never seen anything like them before." "Only because she's still an assistant," said Vega. "As soon as one of the real botanists takes a look, they'll identify them in no time." Cassie shrugged. "I guess time will tell," she said. "How long do you think it will take? I wonder if we'll hear from them tomorrow. Do you think—" Her voice trailed off. "Vega? Vega, are you even listening to me?" But Vega had just spotted a flash of pink and black ahead, and wasn't listening at all. She grabbed Cassie's arm, dropping her half-eaten muffin. It fell to the floor unnoticed, and was promptly squashed by a foot clad in a shiny, bright yellow shoe. "Scarlet," she managed to say. "I think I see Scarlet." Cassie's eyes lit up. "Where?" she asked eagerly. "Up ahead." Vega grabbed Cassie's hand, marveling briefly at how cold it was, and dragged her through the crowd, elbowing students out of her way in her excitement. "Watch it," said a fourth year with purple braids, turning around with a scowl. "What's your hurry?" asked another, as Vega accidentally knocked into her. "So rude." Cassie ducked under another girl's elbow as Vega spotted her target, a girl in a black miniskirt, pink and black striped leggings, and a matching hoodie pulled over her head. Vega reached out and grabbed the girl's arm before she could disappear. The girl spun around and smiled pleasantly at the two. "Hey, can I help you?" she asked, pulling down the hood and exposing her pale pink curls. Vega felt the sinking feeling of disappointment in her stomach. "Starscuse me," she mumbled. "I thought you were someone else." The girl nodded and turned away. Cassie gave a strangled laugh. She was much friendlier than Scarlet anyway. Vega grinned despite herself. "You're right." The two girls stared at each other for a moment. Vega shrugged. "Oh well," she said. "Here I am." She was standing right in front of her wish identification classroom. "See you last period," she told Cassie, and turned to go into the classroom. "See you last period," said Cassie. Vega saw her own look of disappointment mirrored in the girl's expression. "Vega! Starland to Vega!" someone said with exasperation. Vega sat up straight with a start. She suddenly realized that every starling in class was staring at her. The formidable professor was standing right in front of her, snapping her fingers in her face. Oh, Starf. "I'm sorry," she told the teacher, who was looking at her expectantly. "Can you repeat the question?" Professor Lucretia Delphinus looked disappointed. My most ardent student, not paying attention, she said with a sigh. And here I was thinking that my lesson was particularly interesting today. Vega was deeply embarrassed and felt her cheeks flush hot and sparkly. She hated disappointing her teacher and being called out in front of the other students. She could imagine what they'd say. See, she's one of those remedial class girls who don't belong. I knew she wasn't so smart after all. But she had been mulling over the events of the past 2 days and had zoned out. I asked, "Are you paying attention?" Professor Lucretia Delphinus said with a smirk. I guess I know what my answer is. Half the class tittered, relieved that they weren't the ones caught in the starlight. The other half winced in sympathy. Sorry, said Vega. Not as sorry as I am, said Professor Lucretia Delphinus, which, as intended, made Vega feel even worse. Vega was relieved to head to remedial class at the end of the day. She always felt much more relaxed when she was surrounded by her fellow star darlings. She settled herself in her chair, set her Stars app just so in the corner of her desk, and switched it on to begin recording so she wouldn't miss a word the teacher had to say when she arrived. Vega recorded everything, including the teacher's greeting and farewell, and appended her own thoughts to the recording. If a fellow student ever missed class, she always went to Vega, because Vega took the best and most thorough notes in the school. The door slid open, and the teacher stepped inside. Vega's heart sank. Was this a joke? That day's visiting lecturer was none other than Professor Lucretia Delphinus herself. Greetings, students, she said as she walked into the classroom briskly. The star darlings sat up straight and silenced themselves immediately. She smiled when she saw Vega giving her a sheepish look. Vega, all has been forgiven, she said. We start anew right now. Vega smiled back tentatively. The professor sauntered down the aisle and paused at Vega's desk. I'm only hard on you, star darlings, because I expect great things from you, she explained. Vega nodded, relieved. Today we are going to concentrate on wish identification, she said. This is the most difficult part of the wish-granting process. She looked around the room. Why is that? She asked. Vega's hand shot up. She was eager to impress. Yes, Vega. Because we don't receive a firm indication of when a wish is identified, the way we do when the wisher is first identified. It can be different for everyone. Starlings have to rely on their gut feeling because they have no indication they are on the right track at all. The professor nodded. Then someone caught her eye. Ah, a new student, the teacher said. What is your name? Ophelia, the starling answered. Her cheeks flushed and sparkled. We'll start off with an easy question for you, Ophelia. How do you know when you have identified the correct wisher? Ophelia looked panicked. Shamefaced, she stared down at her desk. I can't remember. Tisk, 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 said the tiny teacher. This is the difference between a successful mission and coming back from Wish World with an empty wish pendant. With a strangled sound, Leona stood up and ran out of the room. Professor Lucretia Delphinus looked surprised. Was it something I said? She asked. She shrugged. Vega, can you help Ophelia out? Vega could, and did. She sat back in her seat, happy to have redeemed herself. After class, she got an approving nod from the professor, and she left the room with a bounce in her step. Cassie caught up with her, her cheeks pink from exertion. After surreptitiously glancing around to make sure that Ophelia was not in earshot, she spoke. "Excuse me?" asked Vega. She bent down closer to Cassie to hear better. "Did you see that?" Cassie asked in a hushed voice. "It's so obvious that Ophelia shouldn't be here. I wish we could find Scarlet and tell her that." Vega shook her head. "Just because she's slow to catch on doesn't necessarily mean she's not Star Darling's material," she said. "But it would be great to find Scarlet and see if she knows why she was kicked out. I'm sure there's a perfectly rational explanation." "If you say so," said Cassie. But to Vega, she did not look convinced one bit. It was pretty clear that Cassie was not a morning person. Vega, on the other hand, was. She almost burst into laughter when she knocked softly on Cassie's door, so as not to disturb the still-sleeping sage. Bright and early the next morning, and the girl emerged from her room. Vega looked as crisp and neat as usual, wearing a blue tunic and footless tights. Her usual serenely sophisticated style. Cassie, who tended to prefer dainty comfort in her outfits, walked out of the room with a scowl on her face, her pigtail buns askew, her dress tucked into her leggings, and 2 different silvery shoes on her feet. Vega untucked the girl's dress for her and pointed to her feet. Cassie glanced down, groaned, and returned to the room to find a matching pair of shoes. But Cassie's grumpy expression began to relax as soon as they stepped outside into the early morning starshine. They were headed to the botany lab to check on the flowers. "Don't you think it's weird that we haven't heard from them yet?" Cassie asked as they boarded the cosmic transporter. Vega shortened her step a bit to match Cassie's stride. "Maybe they're busy," suggested Vega. "Our flowers probably aren't too high on their priority list." "Well, they should be," said Cassie grumpily. They exited the cosmic transporter in front of Halo Hall and walked up the white marble stairs. When they reached the warm, moist lab, Cassie lunged forward and gave the bell a single polite ding before Vega could get her hands on it. A vase of crimsonalias sat on the desk nearby. Cassie gave Vega a look. "Don't even think about ringing that bell," her expression seemed to say. Gladiolus Rose strolled through a doorway, wiping her hands on her white lab coat. "Hello," she said. "How can I help you?" Cassie gave Vega a glance. Didn't the assistant recognize them? It was almost as if she was meeting them for the first time. We're just checking up on the flowers we dropped off the other day," Vega explained. The woman looked behind her and lowered her voice. "I haven't shown them to anyone yet," she said. "The person I wanted to show them to, Professor Peony, has been in a terrible mood lately, so I didn't dare approach her." "Gladiolus?" someone called out in a peevish tone. Gladiolus rolled her eyes and began rearranging the bright red crimsonalias. "That's her," she said. "Looks like today isn't going to be any better." She leaned forward. "Listen, I'll try to show the flowers to her later today if I can. I promise." "Gladiolus!" Professor Peony called again, a rising note of annoyance in her voice. "Coming!" Gladiolus called back loudly. She looked down at her hands and realized she had snapped one of the crimsonalia branches in 2. "My stars," she said. "Look, I've got to go. Why don't you come back in a couple of star days, and I'll hopefully have an answer for you by then." The 2 girls sighed. "Fine," said Cassie. As soon as Gladiolus left the room, Cassie whirled around to face Vega. "Did you hear that? They're arguing." Vega shook her head. "All I heard was one impatient professor. Hold your galliopes." "Fine," said Cassie with a shrug. "We'll find out soon enough." She rubbed her hands together. "I can't wait till I'm proven right." "Time will tell," said Vega. "You might just be joining me for 16 straight star days of puzzles." "Oh, boy," said Cassie, feigning excitement. "That's the spirit," said Vega with a grin. They walked to the Celestial Cafe. The light wasn't flashing yet, so they settled themselves on the steps, which were cool, still holding a bit of the chill from the previous evening. Just then, Leona and Ophelia walked by, arm in arm. Cassie stiffened. Then she sighed. "I just miss my friend," she said. "And I'm worried about Scarlet. I wish things could go back to the way they used to be." Vega laid a hand on Cassie's arm. "Everything is going to be okay," she said. She just hoped she was right. The Star Darlings were quieter than usual that morning at breakfast. They all seemed to have a lot on their minds. But the air of melancholy didn't do anything to affect Vega's appetite. She quickly polished off her order of star cakes and was wiping her chin with her napkin, about to star-excuse herself from the table, when there was a muted buzzing noise, like a swarm of happy glitter bees discovering a blue beetle garden. 24 eyes widened, and 12 hands reached out to grab their star zaps in unison. SD Wish Orb identified. Proceed to Lady Stella's office immediately. From the other side of the table, there was an excited yelp, which was quickly hushed. Adrenaline coursed through Vega's veins, and it took all her will to keep herself from jumping out of her seat and running as fast as her legs would carry her to Lady Stella's office. That wasn't allowed. She breathed in and out deeply several times to maintain her focus. The other Star Darlings were also admirably composed. Either alone or in pairs, the girls pushed out their chairs, stood, and strolled out of the cafeteria casually, chatting to one another, grabbing an extra astromuffin, looking like it was just another day. Vega glanced around at everyone, fully aware that behind their calm exteriors, they were all just as tense and excited as she was. "We should join the acting club when this is all over," thought Vega. "We're naturals." Vega arrived in Lady Stella's office right after Leona and Ophelia, and just before Clover. They filed in and took their usual seats. As Vega drummed her fingers impatiently on the table, Libby twirled a piece of her pink hair around her finger, Leona scowled, Ophelia looked positively terrified, and Adora hummed tunelessly. "Stop it!" snapped Tessa, and the two started to argue. Then Lady Stella appeared in the doorway, and everyone immediately hushed. Tall and regally beautiful, she wore a silver turban, and her lips were painted a brilliant shade of red. She spread her arms, her full sleeves ballooning out at her sides. She looked down at them with a tender smile. "I realize you're all very excited and tense," she said. "But Star Darlings must always be respectful of each other. I just want to remind you that you were chosen not for your singularities, but because of the way the 12 of you fit together, like the pieces of a puzzle. You must support each other at all times, not tear each other down." Vega looked around the table. Everyone was rapt. She marveled at how even when they were being scolded by Lady Stella, everyone still looked grateful to have her attention. "We're sorry, Lady Stella," said Tessa. Everyone murmured agreement. Lady Stella clasped her hands. "As you know, a Star Darling's wish watcher has spotted a wish orb that has begun to glow," she told them. "This means that a wisher's wish is ready to be granted. And one of you is the perfect starling to fulfill that wish. One of you," she paused, "will shortly be on your way to Wish World to begin a journey that, if all goes well, will be beneficial to both you and your wisher. And Starland itself, of course," she added. "Now, we will head to the Star Caves once more for the Wish Orb presentation." Lady Stella realized that one student was looking quite confused. She smiled at her kindly. "This is all new to you, Ophelia," she said to the new star darling. "You see, underneath the school are secret caves known only to me, the Star Darlings, and a special few of my trusted advisors. That is where we have our own secret wish house, where special wish orbs are planted. When a wish orb begins to glow, we hold a secret ceremony to determine which of you is best suited for the mission, based on your talents and the nature of the wish." Ophelia nodded mutely, her face drawn. She made Cassie, who, as usual, looked slightly ill at the possibility of going down to Wish World, look starmendously excited in comparison. Lady Stella walked to her desk, pulled open the top drawer, and reached inside. A hidden door in the back wall slid open, and Ophelia gasped. A faint, musty chill snuck into the room. Silently, the Star Darlings stood and made their way to the door, in a calm and orderly fashion. There was no pushing or shoving or arguing as each girl patiently waited her turn to pass through the doorway and carefully made her way down the circular staircase, gripping the cold banister. Vega heard someone say, "After you, of course," and someone else said, "No, you first." And she grinned, knowing that the girls were going out of their way to show Lady Stella just how civilized and supportive they could be. The hard soles of Vega's blue clogs made sharp ringing sounds on the metal stairs. She felt lightheaded, and the hand not clutching the banister was all fluttery, like it was trying to escape from the end of her arm. "I've never felt quite this nervous before," she thought, surprised by her reaction. Just before every other Wish Orb presentation, she had been as matter-of-fact as usual. She wasn't sure what was going on with her this time. At the bottom of the steps, she jumped when Cassie put a cold hand around hers and gave it a squeeze. She smiled at her friend's thoughtfulness, especially since she knew how nervous Cassie must be. "I'm sorry Scarlet isn't here," said Cassie in a low voice. "She loves these caves." Leona turned around and scowled at them both. Vega ignored her and looked around the gloomy space, not certain what Scarlet found so appealing about the caves. They were dank and drippy, and they smelled old and musty. Strange creatures inhabited the dark corners, and you never knew when one might dart out and run across your foot, its claws scrabbling over your instep. She shivered at the thought, then had a sudden realization. That was exactly why the dark and mysterious Scarlet liked the caves, actually. They walked through the gloom single file, as Lady Stella led them down several twisty hallways, then came to a stop in front of a nondescript door. Vega blinked. She was fairly certain they had come an entirely different way the time before. The headmistress pushed open the door and grinned as glorious sunshine poured into the dark hallway. Ophelia gasped, and just like that, the flutter focuses that had been dancing around in Vega's stomach vanished. That was exactly what was supposed to happen. She could feel it. She was suddenly, strangely, gloriously calm. She had this. She just knew it.